explore accessibility and learning experience design. We are going to be recording the main portion of this for those who are unable to attend, but we will not be recording any of the breakout sessions. So those will be private spaces for you all. To support your processing, we have created a participant notebook. The links to those, whether you would like to access that via Google Drive or via download, are on the screen, and Liz is posting those in the chat as well. So here we go. We are hoping you are willing to share a little bit of anonymous information with us so we get a sense of where folks are on their accessibility journeys. Candace is going to share a poll for us. And if you can take a moment to share your information. We have an amazing response rate for those of you who are in survey type stuff. We are at 93% right now, which is like delightfully unheard of. And thanks for those of you who are giving encouraging nonverbals. We would like to share those results with you. It is looking like there are a couple of people who are very early in their accessibility learning journey. Welcome, yay, that's awesome. We're so glad to have you. And it looks like a fairly normal bell curve that we have a large number of people who know some basics and are feeling pretty confident. And then we have a few people who are on the other end of that spectrum feeling pretty advanced. And so we hope that you will be able to share knowledge and experience and kind of pull everyone up toward you. And here, there's so much fun stuff happening. Okay. I would like to introduce myself and my colleagues first. We represent two master's programs. MALXD is the Master of Arts in Learning Experience Design, and MAET is the Master of Arts in Educational Technology, both in the College of Education at Michigan State University. My name is Brittany Doman. I use she, her pronouns, and I am the director of our graduate certificate programs within our master's programs.
And my name is Liz Boltz. I use she, her pronouns, and I am the director of the MALXD and MAET programs.
And I'm Candace Robertson, pronouns she, her, and I'm the Assistant Director of Student Experience and Outreach. Today, we will establish norms, purposes, and goals, explore shared definitions and key terms, explore accessible design, consider challenges in breakout rooms, and continue our learning. This is our community engagement framework, which is going to guide our interactions today. First, we really believe, and it's important for us to bold and say this loudly, is that accessibility matters. And we know that you feel the same way, and that's why we're all here together to share this space today. We're all co-learners. This is part of a bigger journey. We only have an hour together, which means we're only going to scratch the surface. We'll be moving quickly, and we will provide additional resources so that you can dig deeper on your own after this. We're asking that you move up and share when the time is right, and that you also move back and take in all the wonderful things that your colleagues are sharing as well in this space today, because all of us are bringing our individual expertise, and we're so excited that we're all together in this space today to connect. If there are any other norms, please feel free to share in the chat or in the Q&A throughout our time together today. Please ask questions or share resources at any time, especially if you feel more comfortable sharing in this way, because this is a time for all of us to connect.
Our shared goals today are to cultivate mindsets for approaching accessibility in learning spaces, to identify 3 dimensions of inclusive design to apply in your practice, to deepen your knowledge of strategies for web accessibility, to identify starting points for developing your accessibility practices, to learn from others' experiences and mistakes, and to improve your accessibility workflow. So we, in the spirit of backward design, want to kind of start with a snapshot of what happens when you have really good, consistent, accessible design. It leads to students and learners making notes, saying or typing things like, once you know how intentional it can be, it's jarring and disorienting to experience it another way. Or, I really enjoyed the structure of this course and having consistent schedules and deadlines. That you might hear or see things such as the course was very easy to follow, and D2L, which is our learning management system at MSU, was very structured and clear. And then our 4th bullet point has nothing in it, because it is also possible that even with the best, most accessible design, your students won't say anything because they may not notice the work that you've put in. And that can sometimes be hard because we like it when our learners notice cool stuff, but ultimately a lot of accessibility is sort of behind the scenes, and you might not get those student comments around those, but we still do it because it's the right thing to do.
We think it's important to start with some shared definitions. So, and this is Candace speaking, we believe that accessibility is an act of social justice. Accessibility is creating an environment, activity, tool, or resource that can be easily understood and used by everyone. Accessibility reduces barriers, increases sense of belonging, considers representation, and supports all learners. Ableism exists in big and small ways in everyday life and in our design work. Ableism is a set of stereotypes and practices that devalue and discriminate against people with disabilities. It assumes that the bodies and minds of non-disabled people are the, quote, default, placing value on them based on society's perceptions of what's considered, quote, normal. And we believe in inclusive design. It's design that considers the full range of human diversity with respect to ability, language, culture, gender, age, and other forms of human difference. And you'll notice throughout, as part of our accessibility practices, we'll be reading from our slides to make sure that everybody has the same access to the content.
This is Brittany. Approaching accessibility can be daunting, and we know that there are a few of you who are really new to this, and so we can say we were there not too long ago. We get it, but we also have learned a lot and want to share that if you can think about accessibility from these 3 perspectives, it may help both you start and advance your process. So we are going to break this up in terms of people first, informed practices, and more than a checklist. So on this slide, there is a table that has a medical model on the far left, a social model in the middle, and a cultural model of various elements of difference and disability and ability. Along the left-hand side in the rows are the view of disability, the cause of it, the locus of the problem, change agent, target of change effort, and goal of change effort. So for example, from a medical perspective, disability is often considered a deficiency or an abnormality, whereas that same medical experience may be seen as a difference from a social model, or if we view it from a cultural model, a valuable elements of difference and human diversity. And then taking a similar approach, a medical cause might be rooted in some type of physical or psychological deficiency. From a social perspective, we would say the cause is ableism or lack of accessibility. And from a cultural model, we would say that it's ableism, lack of accessibility, mindsets, attitudinal barriers. So we bring this up in the beginning to help us all kind of reflect on where we are in the spectrum. And we're not going to ask you to self-disclose or anything like that, but we're going to encourage you, if you kind of tend toward medical model, do you think we could help you move to a social model in the next, well, realistically, hours probably not going to be enough time, but can we start you on that journey? And if you tend more toward a social model, could we nudge you toward a more cultural model in terms of approaching accessibility and the work? So, as we approach our first principle, people first, we would like for you to take a couple of minutes in your participant notebook and reflect on ways in which you are already engaging in these practices, such as recognizing diversity and uniqueness, including having process and tools that are inclusive and having broader beneficial impacts. So if you could please pop over there, we will give you a couple minutes where we actually don't talk to you and give you a chance to process and reflect.
We had a question come in that is, what is meant by broader beneficial impact? And in that, we mean outside of your learning experience that you're developing, how does this generate a broader impact potentially in the community, through people who interact with your design?
All right, thanks everybody. Um, I also am wondering if some folks are struggling with broader beneficial impact because there are systems not in place to help that be an easy thing for you. So if you were struggling to come up with those or came up with some, but they weren't as broad or beneficial, I'm guessing it's probably not because of anything you individually have done.
All right, this is Candace speaking. And now we're going to shift into informed practices and how might we do this? So how do you know about your learners you're designing for and their perspectives. There are 5 practices on the slide: conducting user research, involving diverse perspectives, prioritizing accessibility, designing for flexibility, and testing and iterating. And in designing for flexibility, to expand on that for a moment, we're talking about what are your learners going to do with the design? Is there an opportunity for them to utilize it, modify it, make it work for their needs? And so we're going to give you a moment to consider the last time you were designing a learning experience and how did you maybe touch on these 5 practices, or what was or what is difficult to do in your position as you try to maybe do these 5 practices. So we'll give you a moment for that reflection in your participant notebook. All right, go ahead and wrap up that thought where you're at. And so once we consider how we're designing them, we also need to consider how we're designing inclusive learning spaces. So when we think about learning spaces, there are 3 areas of inclusion that we can use to guide this work: physiological inclusion, cognitive inclusion, and cultural inclusion. So in physiological, we can think about how do we accommodate a variety of physical attributes and abilities? How do we make it easy for folks to use who have a different variety of backgrounds in language and technical skills? How do we meet the social needs of our learners? In cognitive, we can consider how we respond to a range of cognitive diversity, how we support our learners to receive and comprehend information, how we're promoting engagement with the actual content or information. And then culturally, we can think about how we're honoring and reflecting a variety of social identities in our learning spaces, how we're including environmental cues to increase social belonging. Those would be verbal cues, visual, and interaction design. And then we can plan for the intersectionalities of our learners. And then when we think about our work that happens in digital spaces, we need to consider web accessibility. And so there's a website that's linked in your participant notebook that you'll do an activity with in a moment. But the World Wide Web Consortium, or the W3C, is a website that you can go to if you're building that practice or starting to advance those practices to build your understanding, review the fundamentals, review your technologies that you're utilizing with your learners or with others' learners that you're designing for. Exploring principles and standards. If you're new to this work, the WCAG standards will be found on this website, and you can explore those. And then we're going to start at this work and we're going to get better at it. And we're going to continue advancing, because the more we do this, the more we get better at it and the more advanced our knowledge and understanding gets.
So I'm making sure that I am not muted. What we would like to do is use the information resource that Candace just described into this idea of accessibility being more than a checklist, and engage you in a treasure hunt. So these prompts are going to be in your participant notebook, but we're going to ask you to go to the W3C website and find a resource that seems interesting. And then locate the principles on the left side of the menu or in the text. Locate the standards on the top menu, and then open the design and develop overview on the top menu. And you might find that you get really into one of these and your treasure hunt takes you deep into that. That's fine. You can do a deep dive treasure hunt or a broad scope treasure hunt. But we want to help you know more about this great resource so that you can use it to, like Candace said, improve or begin. So we'll give you a few minutes to work on that.
Okay, go ahead and wrap up that thought and where you're at in your treasure hunt.
This is Brittany. When we talk about accessibility being more than a checklist and then give you a list of things to consider, we understand the irony, but we also know that starting with accessibility is probably the hardest part, just because it can feel like you're entering a world that you've never experienced before. And we're going to offer just some suggestions on places that you might want to start. And for those of you who are past the starting point, hopefully this list includes things that you are already doing, but it also may have some things that you're not doing yet. So headings are a great place to start. Word and Google products have those built in, as your learning management systems probably also do. Color contrast is also another great place to start. You can practice making sure that the dark is dark enough and the light is light enough for it to be able to be seen, and there are color checkers on the internet. Text emphasis is where you make sure that you're not using all caps, for example, to indicate emphasis, because a screen reader is going to read that out in letters like MALXD, but instead you're using bold in a color or italics in a color. Making sure that you are using descriptive hyperlinks, because quote unquote click here is not very accessible, but we also don't want to have the full URLs either, because screen readers would read those out letter by letter. Another place that we know people often start is by having alt text on images or graphics. That's a pretty good place to start with, like, hey, I just use this graphic, I'm going to go put alt text on it. Making sure that the reading order on slides is set is something that you need to make sure that you're doing, and may also be a great starting point. Video having transcripts or captions, I wouldn't necessarily say is the easiest starting point, especially if you're doing those primarily manually, but hopefully there's enough technological support that you can do that, but making sure that those transcripts are correct, because we can't rely only on the auto generating. Tables in a variety of settings need to make sure that they are formatted with rows and columns and captions. Table captions, I'm blanking on that word. Candace, help me out. Tables.
Transcripts.
Yeah. And then PDF remediation, not where I would encourage anyone to start, but if you do use PDFs in your design, you will need to make sure that those are accessible as well. And so, having given you all of those ideas, what we would like you to do is to reflect in your participant notebook about your current accessibility workflow, in what you're doing, and some challenges. And it's okay if there's not much in the to do it and there's a lot in the challenges. We're here to help you with that.
All right, wrap up your thought where you're at, and then we'll move on.
So on this next slide is, I just chuckled. There's two screen grabs. One is a list of, on the right, a bunch of to-do items, many have checked off, and the one on the left is more of a table form. And this is not prescriptive at all, but these are two screen grabs of our accessibility workflow from behind the scenes. We've, again, used tables and lists and try to make sure that we are being as efficient as possible. If we're working on one course, the things that we do on that, we're going to need to do on another course. So we try to document so we can replicate easily. But you, just like Reading Rainbow, you don't have to take our word for it. You don't have to use this exact idea.
All right, and because finding the time to do this work often is one of the biggest challenges, this is why we're emphasizing so much this workflow component of it. So we're going to go into breakout rooms in a moment to discuss the workflow challenges and share any strategies that we have for that. So in the breakout rooms, you'll briefly introduce yourself because we only have 7 minutes together. We'll do that very quickly. And then we'll share challenges that you have with the workflow and management of your accessibility work, share any strategies that you have that might help others. And then if you would like to, you can document your takeaways in your notebook. So
All right.
Brittany's going to prepare those rooms and send us on our way.
Yep, go ahead and click the join button and you'll be transported to a magical place. One of the things we want to talk about and share with you in the framework of this being more than a checklist is how some of our accessibility successes and failures layer in with learning experience design. And there is a spot in your participant notebook for discussion notes and takeaways if you want to take any notes. So if we consider learning spaces, learning outcomes, learning activities, and learning assessments as key components to learning experience design, we want to share with you some of our changes that we've made. So in our learning spaces, we used to use his/her. We now use their, because realistically, that gender is probably not important to the content. We used to have phrases such as there are 7.8 billion perspectives walking around, and that was ableist and we didn't need that. So now that same sentence just reads there are 7.8 billion perspectives. We also realized in our journey that we had a lot of inconsistent onboarding for our courses. And so now we have a much more robust and systematic onboarding process for all of our learners and all of our courses.
In terms of learning outcomes, instead of not sharing those objectives or goals, we want to make sure we're sharing objectives and goals in clear, student-friendly ways, considering our expertise, but what a learner who's coming into this content for the first time can actually identify with. Instead of having words like, here's a quick read, we can just say, please explore, because we're not really sure how they're engaging with that reading, through what mechanism, and we don't need to define it with any time constraint or timing at all, because it also might not be a quick thing for them to do. In terms of being really context specific, sometimes we would say like your school, but the reality is our learners are coming from everywhere. So just changing that to your professional context made a big change in making people feel included in those discussions.
As far as learning activities go, we used to be very prescriptive in terms of you need to do this assignment. And now we offer the assignment and ask people if they need customizations. Now, we are coming from a pretty small master's program where this is very manageable, and this doesn't mean you have to do this for every time, but realistically, very few of our students take us up on the customization, but those who do really appreciate the ability to tweak things for their personal use. As a program that deals with a lot of educational technology, we used to prescribe specific technologies for students to use while creating assignments and doing activities. In the world, that doesn't really work because you might not have access to that, or you might have a different type of device. So now we give people as much choice as we can. And we also used to have a lot of unstructured group work, which is tricky in asynchronous online spaces. It can also be tricky in face-to-face spaces. And so we have changed that now with having very intentional group work, having roles prescribed so that it's not on the learners to figure that stuff out. We've helped them with that so they are included and as equitable as possible.
And this is Candace speaking in terms of learning assessments. Instead of not having any policies or rationale around assessment, sharing those explicit policies for how things will be assessed and what those assessments will be from the start. Instead of having unstructured evaluation, making sure there's rubrics or checklists or guiding points that are shared before that project or assessment. And then instead of having unshared or unnamed beliefs around assessment or grading or quality of work, making sure that we're really explicit and transparent about naming and sharing our philosophies and beliefs so that learners can have that shared understanding of how that assessment will be evaluated.
And we imagine there might be some of you who are wondering, okay, I'm on board with all of this, but I support others who are not, or people around me aren't. And so here are some ideas that we have gathered from our experiences and others who have engaged in this type of activity with us. Show them the difference it makes if you want to help get someone on board with accessibility. This video or this link takes you to a video where someone is experiencing good and bad accessible design with screen readers, and it's pretty eye-opening if you've not experienced that before. We encourage you to ground accessibility and equity and social justice, or in legal and policy ramifications, or in student success, whatever seems to be most motivating for those who need a little nudge. We hope that you could help frame accessibility as being helpful for everyone. I think someone already put that in the chat, like none of this is bad for the masses. It's great for the masses. We hope that you can help people understand that it is concrete practices that they will use. And if you have templates or other scaffolding devices to share those, or even often to offer to co-work with someone like, hey, let's sit next to each other while we do this, or let's get on the same Zoom and do this work together.
So now we're going to head back to those breakout rooms, and we'd like you to think about what the considerations for design are. So what are challenges you have with either what we've just discussed, in terms of challenges, or challenges in your own professional context? Or maybe you have a question about accessible design that's like really technical or functional that you really need answered. So go ahead and share those. Then we'll brainstorm how someone might address those and some considerations for design. And then you can document that in your notebook. So we'll go ahead and give you 8 minutes now back in breakout rooms to have these discussions.
And this should take you to the same breakout room so you can talk to the same people. Go ahead and click on that join button to be magically transported. Welcome back, everybody. Thanks for coming back. Everybody should be with us in about 20 more seconds. Okay, thanks everybody for coming back. Hopefully, again, you had earth-shatteringly fantastic conversations and have so many ideas and resources and are just feeling pumped and connected. What we'd like to do next is, I've heard this called a waterfall. We'd like you to share a resource or an idea or a technique, or just some type of encouragement for people doing accessibility work in the chat. And what we're going to do is we will copy and paste those and plunk them in these slides, which you have the link to at the top of your participant notebook. So you'll have a list of these resources and ideas, and I think we can commit to trying to organize them as best as possible as well. So if you have an idea, please put it in the chat, and we'll have maybe 40 more ideas. Liz and Candace, do you know if Gabrielle's accessibility videos in media space are able to be accessed by folks outside of MSU?
I'm not sure.
Okay. The College of, for everybody else, the College of Education for a while had an amazing accessibility director, and she created a series of how-to videos. We'll look and see if those are accessible from outside of the university, and if they are, we'll put them in here because they are short and sweet and easy to follow, and I still go to them when I need a refresher on things. Thank you for sharing those. If anything else pops into your head now, or if it comes into your head now, please put it in the chat. If it comes in later, we're going to share our email with you in a moment or two.
All right, this is Candace speaking. So we're going to revisit our goals a bit now. So we attempted and we hoped that we cultivated mindsets for approaching accessibility in learning spaces. And we hope where you started with this, right, when we were reflecting on where we're at and our understanding, maybe we're starting to inch a little bit more towards that next area of expertise. And then we've identified 3 dimensions of inclusive design that in the beginning of this session that now you have some thinking time to go in and apply to your practice. We've hopefully deepened your knowledge of strategies for web accessibility in particular. We've identified starting points for developing your accessibility practices and how to manage that. Hopefully in our conversations today, we've learned from others, and you've learned for sure from our mistakes and how we've corrected those. And then hopefully we've given you some strategies, and your colleagues have given you some strategies to improve your accessibility workflow.
Here on the slide, we have a number of resources. They are also in your participant notebook. Again, we will add the waterfall shared resources as well, but we just want you to know that other people are doing this work and sharing these ideas, so rely on them as much as you can. And we want to thank you so much for joining us. If you ever want to be in touch with us, you can reach all 3 of us at MALXD EGREE, it's our little joke on MALXD and degree, at msu.edu as our email. And at the top of your participant notebook, there is a link that will take you to a place where you can create a certificate of participation for attending this session. And we are so mighty glad, I don't usually say that, but I just got inspired to say so mighty glad that you decided to spend this last hour with us. We hope it was helpful and connective and restorative, and that it will position you to continue on your accessibility design journey.